In the summer of 2015, Europe experienced the highest influx of refugees since the Second World War. Why? The main reason is that Syria has become the world's top source of refugees. The UN and the World Food Programme were not prepared for a refugee crisis on this scale. As a result, many refugee camps are crowded and undersupplied, subjecting people to cold, hunger and disease. The Syrians lost hope that their situation will be getting better anytime soon, so many decided to seek asylum in Europe. Between 2007 and 2014, the European Union had invested about €2 billion in defences, high-tech security technology and border patrols, but not a lot in preparation for an influx of refugees. So it was badly prepared for the storm of asylum seekers. In 2014, the UK lobbied to stop a huge search and rescue operation called Mare Nostrum that was designed to stop asylum seekers from drowning in the Mediterranean. The idea seems to have been that a higher death toll on the sea would mean fewer asylum seekers trying to make the journey. But of course, in reality, that's not what happened. Germany announced that it will without exception accept all Syrian refugees and is now preparing to take in 800,000 people in 2015. More than the entire EU took in 2014, only to impose temporary border controls a few days later and demand an EU-wide solution. All over the West, more and more people are beginning to take action, although support for asylum seekers has mostly come from citizens, not from politicians. But there are fears in the Western world: Islam, high birth rates, crime and the collapse of the social systems. Let's acknowledge this and look at the facts. Even if the EU alone were to accept all 4 million Syrian refugees and 100% of them were Muslims, the percentage of Muslims in the European Union would only rise from about 4% to about 5%. This is not a drastic change and will certainly not make it a Muslim continent. A Muslim minority is neither new nor reason to be afraid. Birth rates in many parts of the Western world are low, so some fear asylum seekers might overtake the native population in a few decades. Studies have shown that even though birth rates are higher among Muslims in Europe, they drop and adjust as the standard of living and level of education rises. Most Syrian refugees already are educated. The birth rate in Syria before the civil war was not very high, and the population was actually shrinking, not growing. The fear that refugees lead to higher crime rates also turns out to be wrong. Refugees who become immigrants are less likely to commit crimes than the native population. When allowed to work, they tend to start businesses and integrate themselves into the workforce as fast as possible, paying more into the social systems than they extract from them. Syrians coming to the West are potential professional workers, desperately needed to sustain Europe's aging population.
The Canadian government says it will keep its promise of bringing in 25,000 Syrian refugees by the end of this year. So how exactly is each refugee usually screened before arriving in Canada? Once the refugee leaves their home country, they take up residence in a host country nearby. It could be in a refugee camp, or if they can afford it, a rental. The host country then processes them, separating the refugees from those who don't meet the criteria of someone seeking asylum. If a person doesn't meet the criteria, they don't get beyond this stage. Then, each refugee must register with the United Nations Refugee Agency. Someone from the UN interviews each refugee to find out about their past and their plans for the future. Next, the UNHCR refers the refugee to a resettlement country, like Canada. This can take a while, and only a small number of refugees get to this point. During an emergency situation, the refugees could be sent to Canada to complete the remaining steps. If they don't pass, they'll be sent back. Then, a Canadian visa officer reviews each refugee's documents to make sure they're eligible to enter Canada. If approved, the refugee must pass through another series of in-depth security checks conducted by CSIS, as well as medical exams. Finally, the visa officer reviews the security and medical exams. If CSIS recommends that the refugee can enter Canada and the visa office agrees, the refugee is granted permanent resident status. Last year, Canada accepted 7,575 people through the Refugee Resettlement Program. For more, visit Global News.
Sister Judith Carroll, a counselor with Casa El Norte in Fort Erie. Casa El Norte is a transitional home that offers shelter for refugees coming into Canada. At Mennonite Central Committee, or MCC, Ontario Regional Office in St. Catharines on Thursday, MCC Ontario Executive Director Rick Kober-Bauman speaks with Regional Chair Alan Caslin, Pelham Mayor Dave Augustin, and St. Catharines Regional Councillor Bruce Timms. The aforementioned dignitaries are now awarding a $25,000 check to the Niagara Region's support for Syrian refugees.